All right, so good morning. Welcome back to Introductory Biology. This is where you guys have all survived Bio 101, and that was super important. You know where you came from. You guys remember some basics, right? Yeah, a little. How some of you may have taken Bio 101 many years ago. Some of you may have taken Bio 101, last week. Um, no matter where we are, I'm going to try and keep you going. If you have any questions, any concerns, just let me know. You guys know I'm Chris, Chris Pantazis, so just call me Chris. It's way easier. Um, we're going to begin the semester now that we're actually past all of the lab safety. We're not setting anyone on fire. Nobody drowned in their own mask, anything like that. Um, we're going to start with the real basics. We're going to go back a few hundred years and talk about how we got here to the descent with modification, a historical perspective on modern biology. Now, the course itself is going to be divided into four big parts. The first part is evolution, systematics, population genetics. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the world. The second part is going to deal with what I like to call the diversity of life. We're going to talk about bacteria, protists, plants, fungi. Third part is going to deal with animals, and we're going to really explore in-depth human systems. So you guys are the model organism. There was a thought behind that of one thing you should probably know from a Bio 101 course is basically how your body works. There are some things I'm really surprised people don't know about either their body or the body of other people. It's kind of weird. 4 sections on ecology. Spoiler alert, the world's basically dying. It's not a happy ending to the course, but that's where we're going to end with is ecology. Everything that you've done in Bio 101 builds into this. The whole reason you have to take Bio 101 first is so you have that grounding in basic chemistry, in basic cellular biology, and a little bit of basic genetics, because this course picks up with genetics after we talk about how we got here. So, without further ado, descent with modification, a history. We have a long history of evolutionary thought. Basically, the world, scientists throughout the world, throughout all of time, have asked, how did we get here? What part of us, how things changed? Well, we haven't always changed. In ancient Greece, Aristotle, boom, this is Aristotle right here. In case he wasn't a statue, but that's basically what he looked like. He thought all of life was fixed and unchanging. Basically, if we saw it, let's say you saw a lion, lions have looked that way forever and ever and ever. People have looked that way forever and ever and ever. Ants have always looked that way. Life didn't change according to Aristotle. Aristotle arranged nature in what's called the scala naturae, which is kind of, I always find that weird because he didn't call it that, because that's a Latin term and he was Greek. You don't mix Greek and Latin terms often. But basically, he arranged all of life on the scale from the least complex to the most complex. You start at the very, very bottom. You've got minerals, rocks. We're like, yeah, okay, rocks. There's rocks. Then a little bit above rocks, you'll have plants, because plants don't move, they don't think. Then you have animals, and you go higher and higher with different types of animals until you have man. There was a straight line from the simplest to the most complex. That's what they thought in ancient Greece. Guys, and if I'm going too fast, just let me know. I'll tell you, most of this, not super important. I'm just giving you a historical context. There you go, right? Drop the pen. Done. I'll tell you when to pick up the pen. How about that? All right. All right. So moving a little bit forward, we had Aristotle. Then we started looking at the Old Testament. That's a religious text, but it was set immediately after the ancient Greek philosophers. To them, just like to Aristotle, life was unchanging. But here, life was designed and perfect. And that matched all of the evidence that people saw in front of them. Everything that they saw perfectly was adapted to their environment. And they said the only possible way for this to happen is if it was by design, that an omnipotent being put that organism into that shape for that reason. Moving along. In the 1700s, Linnaeus came out and said, you know what? My God-given mission in this world is to name every single animal out there. I'm going to give them two names, binomial nomenclature, and I'm going to do it for the greater glory of God, he said. You'll see, pre-1700s and before, things were very, very focused on, we went from ancient Greece, where it was straight up looking at the natural world. Then things became very tied into religion, because most of the educated class was part of the clergy. And then in the 1800s, we start to see a change. We start to see a rational looking at the world. But so Linnaeus starts looking at all the animals, all the organisms out there, and he starts naming them. Now he starts to switch scales. We're no longer going to do a straight linear scale. There's not one organism, then the next, then the next, then the next. It doesn't go like, I don't know, sand, quartz, stone, daffodil, lily, a human. That's a terrible line, but there we go. They don't do a straight line like that. What Linnaeus said was, you know what? Some organisms look like other organisms. They're more closely related to these other organisms. So he created what's known as a nested scale, in which you have a large category, say a kingdom, and then inside that kingdom you have smaller categories, phylum. Then inside the phyla there are classes, then inside the classes there are orders, then there are families, and so on, until you get more and more specific. You hit the species, the specific. So where there might be a whole bunch of organisms in the kingdom, there's only one of a species. So far, so good? So now we've got Linnaeus creating this big classification system. And this is where he starts running into some controversy, because he's like, guys, look, I know we've always said humans are right at the top, but they kind of look like all of these other hominids. They kind of look like all these other apes and monkeys. Excuse me. So he named humans Homo sapien, and placed it very close to the orangutans and the chimps. So even though Linnaeus thought humans are special because God made them, he was the first one that really started slotting our species into a system as if they were species like any other. So that was his big step forward, and people did not like that. Yes?
So did he come up with the modern taxonomical categories, or did he just sort of have his own independent system that we like later?
So that's a great question. So the question was, did he come up with the modern classifications in taxonomy? Kingdom, phylum, class, and so on. So he came up with some of them, but you've got to understand taxonomy, and you guys will learn this as we go through the course. Taxonomy is voodoo witchcraft. Taxonomy is a whole bunch of people who are going to very, very clearly argue with each other to create new classifications or to destroy old classifications. So it's a constantly evolving field. So some of it he made, some of it sort of new. Like the domains now, totally new in the last 20 years. This field is always changing. All right, so now we're moving a little bit forward in time. We hit Lamarck, who I swear to you in this image looks like a zombie. He is not somebody I'd want to run into in an alley anywhere. Scary old man. The very year that Charles Darwin was born, and we have heard of Charles Darwin, Lamarck put forward the theory of descent with modification. Now, he suggested, and this is a big deal because he's suddenly saying organisms aren't made perfect. He's saying, you know what? During their life, they're going to acquire traits that get passed on to their offspring. And those accumulated changes lead to differences in species. Was that, and it makes sense, on the face of it. He said there was a short-necked deer-type animal, and it would reach its neck up in order to eat some leaves. The more it reached its neck up, the longer its neck got. Then, when it had offspring, those offspring inherited that long neck. So now they could reach higher, and they kept reaching even higher. And that's how we end up with the long neck giraffe is after many, many generations of reaching your neck up, that group of organisms got a longer and longer neck. Yeah, people thought that was a kind of good idea, except for the fact that it still flew in the face of religious doctrine. Things are changing. He did not have a good way for this to be passed on. He didn't have the nuts and bolts of how was the neck passed on, because nobody understood the way gametes worked. Nobody understood the way heredity works, like you guys learned in Bio 101. That didn't happen for another century. No, I'm sorry, almost 2 centuries. So along comes this young guy, Charles Darwin, and he rejected that idea. He rejected the idea that you're going to acquire traits and get passed on. He ended up saying that introduced variation, having different shaped necks, was the key to how organisms change over time. Now, even Darwin, though, we keep giving him a lot of credit, he got it totally wrong in the way it was passed on. He thought it was related to what's called pangenesis. Now, all of you are in Bio 102, which means I'm hoping you've learned a little bit from health, what is it called? Not health science, it's family life from high school and middle school, right? How sex works. Here's how it doesn't work, but how Charles Darwin thought. He thought every little piece of your body, all the parts of your body, your brain, your stomach, your heart, they all send instructions down to the egg. Right? So they're sending these instructions down. Basically, the point of the sperm was to tell the egg to start developing. Your body would send, different parts of your body would send instructions down to the egg. They would live in the egg. And then when the sperm hit the egg, suddenly everything turns on and that human starts to develop. That's called pangenesis because it's taking pan meaning everything. So creation from across everything. Not, it doesn't mean everything, it means across. So what he ended up doing was he thought that all of these bits of information would go down to the egg and then you'd have variation. Wrong. Flat out wrong. Now we know. Now we understand that the underlying mechanisms of genetics. We understand what a chromosome is. You guys remember chromosomes? Bio 101? Yeah? Okay, good. Because I want to make you nod. Yeah? Okay, good. We understand that on chromosomes, there's pieces of those chromosomes, strings of DNA that encode for a polypeptide that are then going to be translated, they're going to be transcribed into RNA, then translated into a polypeptide. Then that polypeptide gets turned into a protein, and that protein then leads to a phenotype, the way something looks. So throughout all of human history, since recorded history began, humans have had a need to classify things. Think about the way you deal with your world. Anybody like Skittles? Okay, when you get a thing of Skittles, you dump out the Skittles in front of you. What do? That's exactly what you do. You start separating them to different colors. You know you do the same thing with jelly beans. I guarantee you, because nobody really likes the black ones. You got to avoid the black jelly bean. Right. What I hate about jelly beans the most is I can never tell if it's going to be a sour apple or a lime one. That's just mean. But anyways, humans need to classify. We have to sort. So we started to create these mechanisms for doing it. Aristotle started giving us a scalar system. Linnaeus said it's going to be his life work to name everything. He ended up putting it into a nested scale. From there, Lamarck said, let's figure out why they're different. It's because the child or the offspring will acquire the traits from the parents as the parents change over time. And then Darwin turned out saying, no, it's not that they're taking on the acquired traits of the parents, but there's something to do with heredity, something to do with change over time, and it's being passed down by the parents. So that's where we begin this whole journey. Content review questions. Again, big points from this lecture. What was Linnaeus' contribution to the study of evolution? Linnaeus ended up creating that nested scale. Describe Lamarck's theory of evolution. Lamarck put forward the idea that there's a descent with modification, but his thought of descent with modification was that you got the acquired traits from your parents. And the theory of pangenesis is you have all of these bits of information from across your body get sent down to the egg, where they will then be turned on by the sperm, and you get a human being created. And again, that theory of pangenesis is wrong. It's just a historical notion. Here's where all the images came from.